Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. We're all in our places with bright, shiny faces. And this is the way to start the new day. Elementary school. Sticks with you. Good morning. I'm Lynn DeFreitas, the Executive Director of Friends of Great Salt Lake. And I don't know what to say except you're making this what it is. And I really appreciate your participation. I really appreciate your interest. And sponsors, thank you so much. We couldn't do this without your support. So deep, briny appreciation to you all. Friends hosts a biennial Great Salt Lake Issues Forum, obviously every 2 years. That's kind of redundant. But we've been doing this since 1996. And this year, we've broken the sound barrier with our level of participation. And it's very heartening. Obviously, Great Salt Lake is in the hearts and minds of many. So we do what we can to extend the reach, to expand the conversation, and to work for the future of Great Salt Lake and its sustainability. So again, thank you for being here. Let's see, I think you know by looking at the schedule that we have a really tight schedule. And I apologize for, some issues like no break tomorrow afternoon, no breaks on Friday, but we have lunch and we have breakfast and we have, the Alta Club banquet on Friday nights. So it is what it is. There's a lot to talk about now and into the future. So again, I appreciate you being here. I'd like to begin our program by introducing Brian Steed, the Great Salt Lake Commissioner, and talk about breaking the sound barrier, having an opportunity for the lake to finally be a part of its watershed in the conversations, in the coordination that we all need to be working on, in expanding the reach of developing good science as a reference tool to make mindful, informed decisions, in the opportunity to bring water to Great Salt Lake, and certainly to address ecological viability, air quality, and water quality. With no further ado, Brian, it's yours. Okay.
So thank you so much, Lynn. I want to take a second to acknowledge Lynn and the awesome work that she and her team have done. Lynn has cared about the Great Salt Lake since way before it was cool. And we have now statewide, nationwide, and even international attention on the Great Salt Lake. I'll lean in. And it's kind of cool because we have a great deal of information already and a great deal of momentum already because of the work that Lynn and others like Lynn have done. So please join me in thanking Lynn personally. All right, and now I got to talk loud and I'll go fast. I've got 25 minutes. I feel a little weird talking to this crowd because I've talked to many of you before about these very same things, and so let's roll and see what we can get through. Let's talk about where we've been before we talk about where we're going. You are all familiar with this graph. This is a Google Earth image tracking the Great Salt Lake from really its high points in the 1980s to where it ended in 2022. You'll notice, you're all familiar with it, and certainly that graphic has motivated a great deal of action. Interestingly, that graphic is not where we've ended, though. And I think that's a really important story to tell, because I think that we are now turning a corner. And I'm not going to say that we're there yet, but I will say we're making progress. Let's talk about some things. First, if I can, we all know that there's variability in the lake. There has been since we've been keeping records. And interestingly, since the 1960s, when we divided the lake into two halves with the Union Pacific Causeway, we've seen variability, differences between the north arm and the south arm elevations. One of the things that we thought was super interesting last year is you had a big recovery of the south arm, not a lot on the north arm. And that's because we closed off the causeway berm in large measure and due to salinity. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Current conditions, great news. I couldn't pull up this morning, but last night we had, and this is from yesterday actually, current levels are 4195.1 on the south arm, and the north arm is 4191.6. So that's the red. Interestingly, you'll see that we've recovered a great deal from where we were in our low points of last year. That's significant and I think quite meaningful. And then we've continued to rise on the south arm as well. And that's honestly something I check on the daily. I've become a bit neurotic about it. And this makes my heart sing, especially when we're crossing over that threshold of 4195. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Interestingly, I pulled up the latest satellite imagery I could find from NASA, and you can see some of the benefits of that water coming in. And I wonder, do I have a pointer? I do. So you can see actually around Fremont Island, it's becoming more of an island again, which is pretty awesome. And then you see even places like Farmington Bay becoming more wet than we've seen in a lot of years. We see Bear River Bay similarly more wet. And even on the north arm, we actually see more water coming around Gunnison Island, which is pretty awesome because we've all been watching that with a lot of sadness. So that's good news. The other thing I just point out from this is April 25th, and what do you notice? Still all this white stuff, which is yet to come down, which is snow, and that makes me happy as well. We're not there yet with complete runoff, even though generally speaking, we will have topped out as of May 1st. We're hoping we get a few more weeks here, and honestly, the weather has been cooperating over the last few days. Well, and anecdotally, I have to share that I've become kind of hated in my local community because I'm like, it's snowing! And in May, that doesn't go over as well as it does in February, it turns out. Still, I'm really excited about the snow. Why water level matters. Since 2013, we've known that not all water levels are the same, and that if indeed we have lower water levels, we see more consternation regarding the lake. We see problems. And what we saw when we got down to those low levels really in 2022, we were dipping into what we consider serious adverse effects. Why I'm celebrating 4195 is because you'll notice that is when we cross into the transitionary zone where it is with some adverse effects. Now, before we all celebrate, let's be very clear. We will then lose a lot of that water during the summer because of evaporative loss. But to be where we are right now, it's a 5-year high, and we'll take it. So, still concerns that we got. Obviously, stream flows, major concern. This is just a graph showing flows in the Bear for since 1903 to 2023. And you'll notice that that's not trending in the right direction, both from diversions as well as from just runoff efficiency. We've seen both those concerns. Concerns on endangered species. Wilson Fowler obviously there's a listing petition in front of Fish and Wildlife Service trying to force action on that. It's something that we're all watching very closely. Dust, something that you were all well familiar with, but our friends in the Utah Office of Legislative Audit General did a report in 2023, identified dust as a potential fiscal impact, potentially, because if we were to go in and say have to remediate for that dust, well, then that's going to cost a substantial amount of money, and they put that price tag at $1.5 billion. I think they were conservative on that. And then it's an additional at least $15 million to maintain that infrastructure forever, and that's assuming we don't get water back covering the lake bed. And then salinity, obviously, as the lake levels dropped, folks like Bonnie Baxter and others have been watching this very closely, but there's an inverse relationship between the biological productivity and those salinity levels. The salinity levels increase, the biological productivity goes down. And we saw back in 2022, we were really high salinity levels to the point where we didn't have productivity for brine shrimp or brine flies from an endangered species or other ecological integrity factor that scares us all a lot. So what can we do about it? And that's where we came with a strategic plan. I've been in my job for a little less than a year as the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. The year mark is July 1. We'll all celebrate. It'll be great. I was given this great gift. The great gift being that kind of we'll call it an end-of-year present that we had to come up with a strategy in pretty short term. So it started July 1. I had to have this done as on November 30th. It had to be submitted to the governor's office, and we had to do all these things, which was, I'm not going to let you read it, but because it's probably an eye exam for those in the back. I am curious. Can you see the E? I'm teasing. But if you look at that, consulting with a lot of folks, trying to make sure that we understood where things were on the lake, as well as developing a pathway forward on the various strategies on the lake. We actually met those deadlines, and what that meant was, this was Thanksgiving for Tim and I. We spent a fair amount of time talking about this, and in case you don't know, Tim Davis, Tim, say hello. Tim's the deputy. If you don't know him, get to know him. He's awesome, and we're really lucky to have him. And we are a very, very lean shop. As of today, we have exactly 2.5 people. But we work very closely with all the other agencies, and let's talk about that. So we came up with 3 time frames of where we want to be. We had a short term, that is this year. So the first year of our operations, we really know that there was 4 goals we needed to do. One, we needed to have better coordination between the different agencies within the state, as well as federal government working on that. We also know that we need the best available science. We needed to get more water to the lake, and we need to protect water and air quality going forward. So that's what we're working on this year. How are we doing that? Well, this graphic, it kind of washed out, but those are a bunch of paddlers on a canoe. And if we don't paddle together on this canoe, we are going to go in all sorts of different directions and often not make the progress that we could make. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of you that have been working on these issues for a long time, but it's really important that we work together on these issues so that we're able to go most effectively forward. So we're working with different state agencies, and when you look at what that looks like, it's a complicated graph of all of those state agencies around the periphery that have some influence over Great Salt Lake policy. In addition to that, there are others in the federal government over which we don't have jurisdictional authority, but with whom we have to communicate and coordinate very closely. So from the Corps of Engineers, the EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, and USGS, with whom we're beginning to have better conversations. So those are the things we're doing. Additionally, we're working with our sister states, Wyoming and Idaho, to help them better understand that indeed this is a cross-jurisdictional issue that doesn't just reside in Utah, but indeed if we do have a listing petition that's successful, or if we do have other federal regulatory action, that will cross those jurisdictional boundaries on the bear. So we'll reach into Idaho, we'll reach into Wyoming, and people are starting to get it. There is actually a meeting coming up where they've asked for additional information on how we are working on Great Salt Lake issues later in June, and that's something we look forward to really start enhancing that conversation. Then we've been working very closely with stakeholders and other providers. Here I'm talking about water districts. One of the things we were most concerned about this year is we knew we had high water levels in our reservoirs. We wanted to make sure that we were releasing water out of the reservoirs earlier than later. It hasn't always been successful, but I can say that most of the water districts that have major water holdings around the area have been very, very thoughtful in their ability to release water early. And that means that it remains in the rivers and streams to get to the lake in a meaningful fashion, and we have had huge flows. We're still quantifying the exact amount, but Tim and I are available after to talk about those kind of preliminary numbers. So there's that. Last but not least, we really do believe that the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council needs to be the council for the commissioner's office. They've done tremendous work, and that's what we're trying to work with them on to make sure that we can then put them in that official position. The statute references that, but we had kind of moving pieces of legislation during this last legislative session to where we weren't able to get the exact configuration we were looking for. That'll be a work in progress going into next year. Best available science. There will be many presentations on this throughout today, tomorrow, and on Friday, and so I'm not going to get into that, but what we are trying to do mostly, first and foremost, is to make sure we have the best information available. One of the things that we've been working with very closely is the Division of Water Rights to make sure that we understand how much water remains in streams and makes it to the lake. We've been working with people like Beth Neilson and others, Dr. Beth Neilson and others from Utah State to make sure that we understand where that monitoring should take place and how it should take place. And so that's what we're doing. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, which is a project that's been ongoing that preceded the creation of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office and actually will not conclude until 2027. But really, this is trying to synthesize and put together the best available science and information on the Great Salt Lake. We expect results officially out in 2027. We obviously have to make major decisions before then, and so we'll be working with Candace Hassenjaeger and her team to make sure that we are working very closely together and synthesizing whatever information is produced real time as we make decisions regarding Great Salt Lake. And then working with the Great Salt Lake Strike Team to make sure that universities, Utah State, and University of Utah, the various divisions, and others will be expanding those efforts to make sure that we understand the best available science from that kind of coordinated effort. Short term, getting more water to the lake. Wanted to focus a little more on this in detail. One, there has been a lot of talk on the failure of setting a healthy range and time frame for the lake. We did this. The Great Salt Lake strategy does actually set a time frame and range. The range is now by state policy 4198 to 4205. That's how the state defines healthy, and so that's set. And then how are we going to get there? We actually have a plan to get there in 30 years. I know 30 years sounds like an extraordinarily high or a long number of years. I understand that, but when you look at the amount of water that's required to get there, it's a substantial amount of water, and we're going to have to really work together to make sure we get that water to the lake. We're talking hundreds of thousands of acre feet. When I mention that in a group like this, people say, okay, if I were to go to a farming community and say hundreds of thousands of acre feet, I would get pitchforks, maybe not literally thrown at me, maybe. But there would be a lot of people that would be very concerned about that number, and so that's something we're working together on to make sure that we do this in the most effective way. And then just so you know how we're planning to do this, one of the things we mentioned in the strategic plan is a specific 30-year strategy to get the water to the lake. Tim and I are working very closely on this and happy to talk to you offline on where that is and where it's going, but I think that it's going well. The second thing the strategy does is we advocate for a floor to where we saw huge problems when we dipped down into 4188 in that range because we saw huge salinity concerns. We said that can't happen again, and so we did set a floor, and now that floor is set statutorily by HB 453. That was the mineral leasing bill, and that leasing bill says, hey, when the lake reaches 4190, by statute, we're sealing off the causeway berm. I know that's a big deal, and I know that that's not something that you all want to see. And quite candidly, we all want the lake to recover as a whole. But when you look at the ecological integrity concerns we've got, we are going to say making sure that we have sufficient fresh water going into the South Arm to make sure that we don't have salinity spikes like we saw. That's going to be state policy. And making sure that happens, and so we're doing that. The other thing that I think was really interesting on HB 453, which by the way was a lot of work, set really rules for the mineral companies on how much water they can use, as well as incentivize them coming in with their own plans on how they can use less water when the lake is not doing well. And most of the major mineral companies are at the table making major concessions, and I can tell you that's not to be overlooked. It's a big deal. So other things that we're doing to get water to the lake. We, one, are working with the state to quantify saved water. That's something that, again, by statute was envisioned. We haven't necessarily come up with a number on that, but we are working towards that end, making sure that the governor's proclamation, making new appropriations impossible in the basin, part of state practice going forward. And then we're looking for better practices when it comes to saved water, and starting those first tranche of saved water transactions if we can get there. And state, I can see Teresa's got the look. When I say this, Teresa goes, this will be through existing rules and statutes. We have to make sure that we do this right. And so we're starting to dip our toe in those waters. And my guess is we'll have these first transactions by the end of this year. It's harder to do than you might think. But we have to pave that way, and we're looking to do that. And then continuing cloud seeding, as well as working with municipalities on, and as well as Utah waterways to make sure that we have better statutes in local municipalities, which would be a big deal, so that people know that they can save water as we grow, and that's important. Then lastly, we are going to continue monitoring salinity in the South Arm. We are going to have a water quality monitoring generally, working with our friends in DEQ and others to make sure that their standards are set. And then we are expanding air monitoring. And why that's important is because the more information we have, the better we're able to fine-tune our response and understand what areas need to get wet first. We are having a dust forum in the upcoming weeks to where we can talk with experts to get a better sense for where things are on that, as well as to decide how many more monitors we need and where. And that's where we're going forward. So that's all this year that we're working on. And I just wanted to put this picture up. I think that having adaptive management of the berm is going to be really important going forward, especially when it comes to salinity concerns. That's something we don't have all the rules set out yet, but we are working towards getting those rules. We have the start of it, and I think it's going to be really important. Medium term going forward, we are trying to get all effective short-term actions then part of just what we do. And we'll be doing that for the next 1 to 5 years. Obviously, within that time frame, we will have completed the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, and then apply that information to us and all the things that we need to do. We will continue to develop water banking and water conservation statutes as well as practices around the state, because I think that's part of the pathway forward, not the only pathway forward, but part of it. We will be working with forestry, fire, and state lands to understand if we do need to do shorter-term dust remediation. We hope not to. I'm just being very candid because it is extraordinarily expensive, and I'll tell you the cheapest way that we can get there is to get more water to cover it. But if that's something that we are forced to consider, we certainly will consider that. And then lastly, we're considering potential water supply augmentation. Luckily, we're not the ones honchoing this up. Indeed, the state said that there is a new position called the water agent. The water agent will be the person going out to look for more water. We will work closely with them to make sure that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul in some parlance, and just be aware that we're working on that. The next 6 to 30 years, very similarly, continue all effective short and medium term, and then really continue to hone water conservation and banking and water markets. Dust remediation is needed, and then same additional stuff. I will say this. While we were sitting over Thanksgiving dinner working on this plan, any plan looks great on paper. The real key is going to be on implementation. And I wish I had better words of wisdom for you all, but I can say this. It is going to take all of us on implementing this plan. It's going to take all of us to work together to make sure that we have the appropriate practices. That being said, people started to call me Dr. Doom during the height of the of the drought. When I was at DNR, and I would come in and say, here's the bad news. And seriously, Dr. Doom. I got that moniker. Candace is saying yes. I don't feel as much as Dr. Doom as I once did. And that doesn't mean that we are there or that we can take our foot off the accelerator. What I will say is that I think that we are in a better position today than we were 1 year ago. And I will say we are in a much better position today than we were 2 years ago. That doesn't mean that we're there. But through joint efforts, through all of us in this room together, I'm convinced that we can get there and make substantial improvements and make the improvements that need to happen in order to save this thing that we all love, Great Salt Lake. Thank you so much. So what questions do we have? And I don't know how much time I have left. Oh, great, Bonnie. Thanks. I had to say, you have to lean in, Bonnie. No, I'm teasing. I guess it helps to turn the microphone on.
Sorry, I assumed it was on. I have a question about something I know nothing about, which is dust mitigation. So on your last slide, when you talk about dust mitigation, what are we thinking about in the state about what sorts of measures we're taking for dust mitigation?
So currently, we don't have any of those plans into effect. I will say this, we as the state have gone to various places and will continue to go. So 3 weeks ago, we went to Salton Sea. We went to Salton Sea specifically in part to find out what they're doing for dust mitigation measures. What they have done in Salton Sea in large part, they've come in and they've said, hey, we're going to put, in some areas, we're just going to rough up the ground and make sure that that roughed up ground then captures more particles going forward. In some areas, they've roughed up the ground and then flooded it. So there's these kind of troughs of water between that, and that's how they capture dust. And then in some areas, they've just come in and put big bales of hay or straw everywhere, and then had a drip irrigation system that, by the way, has been chewed to crap by different critters in the area. But they put in a drip irrigation system, and that drip irrigation system is then to have more native vegetation come back and do that. On an area the size of Salton Sea, they have been a little effective. In the Great Salt Lake area, which is many, 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 many times the size, I don't know how many bales of hay it would take, but it's a lot more bales of hay, and the cost is staggering. And I would prefer to avoid that. The best way we can avoid that is to make sure that that area gets wet occasionally. And so that's what we're trying to do, just being very candid. If we have to look at other measures, we will later in this year go to Owens Valley to see how they've done there. They've done different techniques there where they have actually had hardening of some of the area. They put down gravel in certain places. Very oddly enough, some looks like an art project, which, you know, that's interesting, but again, very, very costly and probably not the best practice if we can get water to the lake where it needs to be. And so that's our strong preference. Other questions? Don't all speak at once. This is nothing? Oh, yeah.
So something that I've been hearing a lot about is because the ag community is a big user of water, they often get the finger pointed at them, and it's becoming a polarizing issue. So I'm wondering how your office and as a community we can do better, social science, things like that, to make sure that we really are working all as a team and no one's getting blamed more than others.
I think it's a great question. I would say this. I think that humans have this nature to create us's and them's. And by what I mean, this is the social scientist in me. By us's, some people call it brothers and others, right? And what you do is you say, yeah, we can figure this out, but they're the problem. They're the problem. We got to get beyond that in the state. Ag exists for very good reason in the state. And I don't want at all to be perceived as being adversarial to agriculture. We cannot solve this problem without ag being part of it. And when you look at who has the water rights, and I mean that in the sense of property rights, ag are those people that have the property rights. And so we have to work with agriculture, and we have to make sure that people don't perceive that to be an adversarial relationship. There is this nature of pointing fingers. What I would like to say is this is us and this is our problem. And we have to get that sense through ag as well. I can't say that we've always been successful. I can say that I know that certain people in the ag community find it a little threatening and quite honestly are worried about the activities of the commissioner's office. It's something we really need to get ahead of, and one of the ways we're going to do that is just going to meet with as many people as we can. What I would encourage you all, when you hear different stories or different people saying, yeah, they're the problem and we just need to make sure that they don't do what they do anymore, that's probably not the most effective way to approach this, because that's a great way to back people into a corner and have them feel like they're being blamed. And this is not a blame issue. This is a solve together issue. Wayne.
Yeah, Brian, the 30-year time frame is for recovering a lake is roughly the same time frame that people are talking about for the Bear River Water Development Project. And so those are obviously countering each other. Could you address a little bit on how your office is looking at that?
So I wish I had a crystal ball on that. I mean, I can say this. The Bear River Development Project is still on the books. It's something that, and let me be very honest as well, we will grow as a community, right? And water security has been a really big deal. And I can walk around the room and see a variety of water managers and say that that's something that people are concerned about in order to make sure that you've got water security. What we have to do is establish frameworks whereby if we are going to go ahead with projects like that, that the lake is held harmless. In its current configuration, or in some configurations previously, Bear River development was planned to drop Great Salt Lake by at least 8 inches. I can say that in this world, that's probably not going to happen. And so one of the reasons the state's interested in supplemental water is to try to offset if they were to develop that plan. Otherwise, I can tell you that we're going to have to work very carefully to make sure that the lake gets all the water the lake needs, because otherwise we will have additional legal, administrative, and perception problems of what it's like to live here. And so we got to balance those things out, and that's something that I'm glad that Speaker Schultz is here. I know that he cares passionately about that and making sure that we can all go forward without robbing one asset for another.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Just a quick announcement before our next speakers come up. We have green Genesis parked in a fire lane with the T186HT. If anyone here has that, they'd like us to move it. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to take a seat down. This is supposed to be a lakeside chat. And when Lynn asked me to do this, I was super excited because it's the chance to sit down and have a little conversation with, honestly, two of my best friends and former colleagues in the legislature. We're really honored to have House Speaker Mike Schultz with us today and Representative Casey Snider. I want to tell you just a little bit about him, and then we're going to just go through a series of questions and just talk a little bit about what's going on with the lake and what's going on with water policy in the state of Utah. But we have two of the real important leaders on natural resource issues, on water issues, on Great Salt Lake here with us today. They're very busy, so I appreciate them taking some time. We talk a little bit about Mike Schultz. He and I came into the House together 2014. It's hard to believe. It's been almost a decade. And legislative years are like dog years, so that means it's been almost 70 years since Representative Schultz and I were first elected to the House.
I had hair at one point in time when I came in, and
so did I. And so we're now sort of founding members of the Balding White Guy Caucus in the legislature. But it's no exaggeration to say about Mike, about the Speaker, He's quite possibly the most effective legislator in a generation. I don't think that's an overstatement. He's not been afraid to tackle big, difficult issues since he was very first elected. The very first year Mike was in office, he sort of took on the entire business community in an effort to ban non-competes. And
we
it
did
was
that together, remember? I suckered you into that somehow.
Anyway, I rode shotgun, but Mike was steering the ship. Anyway, it was quite an adventure, and I just have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for him. You know, his colleagues elected him Speaker of the House just this last fall. That is a huge, very difficult to pull that off and be elected as Speaker, but he did that because so many people have great respect for what he does. Let me tell you, he very much cares about fish, wildlife, the natural environment, stewardship. These are all really key issues for him. And if you want to find Mike in his happy place, you got to go to his ranch. And he's not sitting back in a chair drinking lemonade. He's out there moving pipe, fixing ditches, fence lines, and things like that. So he's truly a rancher at heart and very successful at everything he does. Casey Snider over here is actually also in leadership in the House. He's the assistant whip. We abbreviate that the ASS whip. And I'll let you decide whether he's the whipper or the whip-e.
We're a mixed company. Sorry if you're offended from the beginning.
But Casey and I go even farther back than me and Mike. We were both colleagues at Trout Unlimited. I was working on water law and policy, and Casey was working on public lands. But he is also not afraid of big, difficult issues. I like to say he's got the Speaker's gift for blowing things up, maybe not the Speaker's gift for putting them back together. But there's very little Casey can't do, including eating 50 chicken McNuggets in under 60 minutes was a Trout Unlimited dare.
While doing push-ups and pull-ups, I just want you all to know.
This was documented on YouTube. It's a fine piece of filmmaking. You can look up The Amazing Snider Man, and you will be one of the 25 people that's watched that video over the past decade. So it's distinguished company here, right? We're going to keep it real. All right, so with that, we're going to move into some questions from these guys because I want to be respectful of their time and yours. And we're going to talk, first of all, just about the question I want to ask first is, when it comes, and I'll go to the speaker with this, when it comes to Great Salt Lake, what do you see as the greatest policy successes to date? What's the biggest stuff that we've done? Mike?
So, Tim, I'm going to just kind of list a couple things, and I'll let you dive into however you want and let Casey add into it. I think there's a couple things. I want to start off with Representative Snider's bill last session with dealing with the mineral companies. And, you know, it's a delicate balance because these are minerals that we need on our everyday life. And so we can't just shut them off, but we also have to find a responsible way to move forward with, you know, extracting those minerals from the lake and doing so in a different way that's been done in the past. There hadn't been a lot of thought to the levels of the Great Salt Lake. Representative Snider took that on a couple years ago, tried to get the mineral companies to work collaboratively with the state. They chose, some of them chose not to do it collaboratively, and so Representative Snider took them on, and we ended up getting the bill into a really good place. We appreciate the legislative process. Certainly it went really well in the House and in the Senate, and the governor was really supportive, and I think that's one of the... There we go. Sorry, Lynn. How's that? There we go. I think I broke it. There we go. This could be interesting. So, but I think that's one of the biggest things long term for the lake. It sets some levels, some extracted in those levels, and I really want to give Representative Snider credit for that. Berm management. On the UP Causeway, managing salinity levels is another area that I think we came a long way in and learned a lot. And credit goes to the community out there. What's that commission that you guys are on?
The Salinity.
Salinity Advisory Council. I mean, they've done a fantastic job trying different strategies on that. Our Great Salt Lake Commissioner, creating one person or agency over the Great Salt Lake. Before that, we had 12 different agencies that all had one or something to do with the lake, and many times they were not working together. And then also just all the water, investment in water optimization, whether it was agriculture or other items out there, I think are some of the biggest things that we've done. And then also just making the public aware of it. I have to give you guys in this room credit, Friends of Great Salt Lake, credit, because for decades you've cared about the Great Salt Lake. And most people in the state didn't really, it was neither here nor there. Everybody knows about the challenges facing the Great Salt Lake today. And so that was public awareness was a big part of it as well.
Thanks, Speaker. And I'm going to shift to Representative Snider. I'm asking you a similar question, Casey, but it's this one. Sometimes you'll hear, and I still hear, just last week I was talking to somebody, people say, well, legislature hasn't done anything for the lake. It's all talk, you know, they really haven't done anything. What would be your response to that criticism?
You know, I think then I'm eating it and it's not doing anything. So, hello, okay. Maybe?
You gotta like put it.
Okay. So one of the things that I don't know what you want. I'll spin it.
You want to come up?
Oh. I'll come up there. Okay. So if this one doesn't work, so help me. You can't see me over there sitting down anyway because I'm so stinking short. But one of the things that I would say is the unfortunate thing about politics is you can't please everybody. I would say that the stuff that the legislature's done the last several sessions has really been monumental, historic. I mean, you can't use those words in enough way because we really have fundamentally reshaped things. And I think we're going to continue to do the basics of moving forward with the lake and in long term trying to save the lake. One of the things that I think is worth noting though, and this is probably going to offend someone, and I apologize in advance. But while we're trying to shift big policy items on Capitol Hill, there are things that are being done that don't help the lake at all. Frivolous lawsuits about trust and birds, those only hinder progress long-term politically as we work to save the lake. Having an obituary about the Great Salt Lake or some sort of climate grieving therapy session, that does nothing to save Great Salt Lake, nor does dancing as a bird or playing every day at 5:30 outside the speaker's office as Saints go marching in. Right? Those things don't save the lake. Like, it may feel good, you may get your name in the paper, all those things, but it does nothing fundamentally to shift the conversation on Great Salt Lake. As you evolve moving forward, if you want to save the Great Salt Lake, help the Great Salt Lake Trust. Donate to them so that there's water acquisition. You want to help agriculture convert? Go to a farmer's market, buy local produce, support agriculture as it shifts to a new production line long-term moving forward. If you want to save the Great Salt Lake, work with your local communities who have surplus water to donate that water to the Great Salt Lake. So again, as we're taking criticisms, I'm being a bit critical back into the community because there are things that can be done that we aren't necessarily doing.
Thanks, Casey. And it's a tall mountain to climb, right? And I think sometimes as a lake advocate, you feel like the mountain's getting... I thought I could make it work, Casey, where you could not. The mountain's getting harder, higher to climb, quite frankly. So depending on what folks do. So Mike, I want to go back to you and just ask you this question. Why do you value the lake personally? What does the lake mean to you?
Well, as you can imagine, I wasn't the easiest kid to raise. I know that doesn't surprise the two of these, you two up here, and I never got into a lot of trouble, but I hated staying at home. And so as a little kid growing up, I lived in Hooper, right on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. Yeah. My mom still has nightmares from it, but as I was a kid growing up, I grew up on the shores of the Great Salt Lake in Hooper. And in the wetlands, from as early as I can remember, in the early 1980s, I would leave my house during the summer all day long, and I would go out and play in the Great Salt Lake and in the marshes surrounding the Great Salt Lake. And during the mid-80s, there became no marshes in the Great Salt Lake. The lake levels rose to the point where it overtook the marshes, and the Great Salt Lake literally was in the backyards. And we were dealing with different times. I remember our community coming together and fasting and praying that we didn't get any more rain, that we didn't get any more water into the Great Salt Lake, because literally the lake levels was seeping into my neighbors' backyards. And we were worried about a big portion of our community. And, year or two later, Governor Bangerter put the pumps in out at the Great Salt Lake, pump water out into the West Desert. Those never really got used, but it's not, we've been here before as a state. Many people don't realize, but in October of 2022, we hit the lowest level the Great Salt Lake had seen. The previous lowest level was only a foot higher, so we only beat it by 1 foot, and that was in the 1960s, I think 1963, if I remember right. And so this is not something that's new to the state, although we care more about the environment today than we did in the 1960s. And so that's why it's a bigger issue. And so people want to say it's because of agriculture, it's because we're using all the water. And there may be a little bit to that. But the bigger thing and the biggest issue that we saw in 2022 was we were at the end. We didn't know at the time it was at the end. Thank goodness it's the end. But we were at the end of the worst drought in 1,200 years. One of the driest cycles we have seen in 20 years is where we were at. We had experienced that, something similar to that in the 1950s and 1960s, and which created the previous lowest lake level. And so we only missed it, we only went lower by 1 foot. But my point in all that is, now look at where we're at today. And lake levels come up about 5 feet. Maybe they're going to come up another foot from where they're currently at. And there's a lot to be optimistic about. But a couple things. One, we need to recognize what the true challenges are, and that's the lack of precipitation. And this goes all up and down the valley. Tim mentioned, I have a ranch. In 2021, 2022, our springs basically shut off. A third of our springs on the ranch and our water holes went dry. River levels dropped by about 2/3, and there was virtually no runoff. There was no moisture in the soil, and any moisture we did get just went directly into the soil, and there was no chance of any of that water making it into the valley, for one, for us to use, two, to make it to the lake. And so it's not just the fact that we're using the water. That is a part of the problem, and I think we've changed some policy, which I think is super important and good. But finding that balance is what we have to do. We have to find the balance, and that's what our number one goal is, and working towards in all the policy that we've shaped. The Bear River Pipeline was brought up. We have to find a balance on that stuff, and I think the current Bear River Pipeline that's on the books isn't likely to happen, and probably shouldn't happen, as Commissioner Steed talked about. And so what does it look like going forward? And that's what we need to figure out.
Thanks, Speaker. And next question for Representative Snider. I asked the Speaker sort of how do you feel about the lake, or why do you value it personally? And the question for you is like, why should the communities care? Why should the state care about Great Salt Lake? What's the big deal anyway?
No, I appreciate that. And like the Speaker, I grew up on the lake hunting and fishing. Now, fishing less so, because If you eat fish that come out of the Bear River, for example, you lose all your hair. Ask Director Joel Ferry, who thinks Bear River catfish are great. But I grew up hunting places like Harold Crane and Ogden Bay and Bear River Bay. And so I have spent most of my life in that north part of the lake and value it greatly. So that's the personal side. But from a community side, there's a whole host of reasons why we should really care about this place and find value there. There are species that require this place. It's a critical stop for millions of migratory birds. That's the environmental service that it provides that no other place in the Intermountain West can provide. That is critical at a macro scale, at an international scale. For us here in agriculture, which I also participate in, the water that comes off of the Great Salt Lake as snowpack because of lake effect snow is critical to everybody upstream. We think sometimes in agriculture that everything in the Great Salt Lake is wasted, but that nothing could be further from the truth. Just if you look at precipitation amounts alone, that being there provides real water for the mountains, which ultimately allows us to have production agriculture moving forward. That Great Salt Lake is a part of our history. It's a part of our heritage. You can go back to whatever point in time, whether it's pre or post settlement, and that place had value to the people that lived here. And we should value it in the same way that those, our forebears, also did. And just having water in the Great Salt Lake from a pure community health standpoint, right? If the dust is exposed, it will blow this way, and you can look at Owens Lake as a critical fault that has happened in other places that could come here if we don't get this right. So there's a whole host of reasons at a community level why we should care, if not just the personal ones that I mentioned.
Thanks, Representative. I'm going to throw this mic in the trash. I'm going to go off script a little bit here. You can see that Representative Snider can get pretty animated. And let me just say, from the perspective of a former policymaker, it is tough work, right? Policymaking is tough work. You do your level best to try to get things done and to do the right thing. And a lot of times you just take slings and arrows, and it can be a huge challenge, right? Like I said, sometimes the mountain that you're trying to climb, it just keeps getting taller and taller. So I want to express my deep appreciation again for both of these guys for really being willing to take those arrows and take those tough steps. But Casey, I do have a special question for you, and that's the question is, how do you feel about phalaropes? How do you feel about phalaropes, Casey? Lo, what do I see in the back of the room? I do believe it may be a phalarope. If I'm not mistaken, it's a dancing Wilson's phalarope. And Casey, before that phalarope gets any closer, I need some reassurances from you that the phalarope is not endangered. Can you assure us that the phalarope is not endangered?
Can't shoot the shorebird.
Okay, Casey says can't shoot the shorebird, so phalarope, I think it's safe for you to approach. Casey, who really looks like he needs a hug. So I think it is nesting season, so we have, I think, yeah, the good representative really looks like he could use a hug. Don't you agree, audience?
Stupid shorebird.
All right, a round of applause for our shorebird, dancing Wilson's phalarope. Thank you so much. And a round of applause for Representative Snider for being such a good sport. All right, we're going to go to two final questions. And I am going to go to Representative Snider to give him a chance to defend himself. Now, actually, what I want to ask you, Casey, is what's next? What do you see as the next big thing? So maybe you want to take position back up here. What do you see, whether it's on a policy front or just what we need to do as a community front, what do you see as the next big steps?
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't actually want to say anything because I don't know what's coming out that friggin' door. So I think long term, we have got all of the big pieces in place to make significant differences in the lake. I really do. We have statutory provisions that allow us to lease water. We have created certainty at the bottom level of the lake as it amounts to evaporation and extraction. We have created a host of political tools, or implemented a host of political tools to really move the ball. Now, going forward, I do think that we need to have a more robust way to ensure that the commitments that we've made, that the promises that we've made are actually delivering on those promises. And in my mind, that means a more robust system in the Great Salt Lake watershed for identifying, measuring, and monitoring water in real time. We're talking about saving water. You know, we have ag water optimization and we save water through those means, but do we really have proof that the water that we are saving is making it to the Great Salt Lake? I would say no. I don't think that the tools are in place at the state engineer's level to ensure that that water is making it to the end of the ditch is there. We just don't have that. That is the reality as it sits now. So in making additional investments, making a more robust measuring, monitoring strategy is critical. I think the work that is ongoing with the trust as it relates to identifying surplus water and ensuring that it makes it to the end of the Great Salt Lake is critical. Building up those pieces, ensuring that the commissioner is successful in his efforts, those things are important. But I also think that there is going to have to be defense. As I look at the world moving forward, you know, we made significant policy changes as it relates to water reuse in the Great Salt Lake. The reality being that if we reused every drop of water that currently goes into the Great Salt Lake from sewer discharges, we would drop the lake another 7 to 10 feet. Hear me now, believe me later, there is push to undo those safeguards right now from communities who think that water, again, that makes it to the Great Salt Lake, even if it's reused water, discharge water, is wasted. And there is an undercurrent happening now to unwind some of those legislative victories, and I think that defense will be the next key component.
Thanks, Representative. We're going to go to our last question, and this is for the speaker. And speaker, this is the question. When you think about the lake and its future, are you optimistic, pessimistic, and if so, why? Why are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Thanks, Tim. First off, thank you. It's been an honor for me to be here and come and speak with you guys today. I'm extremely optimistic about the lake and its future. As I mentioned, and we all know before, we've been here before. We were here in the 1960s. 20 years later, you know, we're putting pumps in the Great Salt Lake, pump the water out. I think you'll see that cycle happen again. Maybe we're probably not using pumps. That's likely not to happen, to pump the water out. But we will see this ebb and flow. I wish that policymakers in the 1960s would have put the things in place and the tools in place that the legislature and policymakers have put into place today. Because as I mentioned, we've been here before, we're going to enter another time. Hopefully it's not while I'm in office and Representative Snider's not in office, that the lake levels will drop again down to low levels. And it's the environment that we live in. Second driest state in the third driest state in the nation when it comes to water. And, you know, but it's what do we do at that point in time? We've put policies in place to help get water directly to the lake. We've stopped water from being taken from the lake once it gets there, once it gets to those low levels. Agriculture optimization, we have done, in some cases, that's saving 75% of the water that was used previously. Conservation is top of mind for citizens of this state on water conservation. And you look at all the policies that's being put together, put in place now to preserve the water going into the future. And then, you know, some of the other policies like the berm management to stop the salinity levels from spiking, you know, is just the opposite of the problem we had in the 1980s when the salinity levels dropped to a point to where we were nervous that we weren't going to have the brine flies and the brine shrimp. So there's a lot of good things and policies that have been put in place that as we approach these times when the lake levels drop, that will be enacted that will prevent us from hitting that tipping point or that cliff that we had hit at one point in time in 2022, October 2022. I'll never forget that month. And so again, it's a testament, I think, to the policymakers as well as the citizens of the state and you all for being involved and being engaged. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Casey. You won't find busier people than these two. Again, they're real champions in the legislature. They've been champions in the lake. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. Thanks for being here.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm William Anderegg. I am presenting this on behalf of the Great Salt Lake Strike Team. We also, along with Beth Neilson, we have a guest cameo too, but it is not a bird. It is another scientist. So we'll try to keep it as exciting as we can. We have the inimitable Matt Yost going to join us as well. We are giving just a quick data update. I want to first just thank the Great Salt Lake Strike Team and all the folks who contributed to this. Many of you are in the room. This has been an incredible partnership between the state's research universities and state agencies to really synthesize the best available science and bring that to bear and share that with policymakers and decision makers on the lake. And the goal has also been to really support the commissioner and guide and help provide the best data for the state's strategic plan. If you are interested, we have published two separate reports, one in February of 2023, and then one earlier this year, January of 2024. Here's the QR code. You can go check these out. I want to highlight what came out in the most recent report, and this is really a reflection on the incredible water year from 2023. We're going to talk a little bit about why lake levels went up, but perhaps not as much as we thought. And then we're going to really dive deeper into some of the key policy levers and options we have, focusing in particular on the conservation and how much conservation do we need to try to restore the lake over different time horizons. You saw this earlier in Brian's presentation. Of course, we hit a record low in the fall 2022. And if you look at, this is the annual average of the lake. It jumps up after that incredibly wet water year, especially in the South Arm, but it doesn't jump up that much. It jumped, 5 feet from peak to trough and really about 2.5 feet from the annual average. And a lot of that is because in that really wet water year, we were refilling reservoirs. This is the change in reservoir storage in the basin. And we were refilling nature's reservoirs, the soil moisture and deep rock water. And this is this fundamental concept that hydrologists think about a lot, is how much water do you have in storage? And when you come off a number of really dry years, a lot of that water first goes into refilling this bucket, and not as much comes out into the streams to head down for reservoirs or people. Now, this is really a tale of two different years because fortunately, this year, after an incredibly wet water year, we're much closer to this high storage section. We've done a lot of that refilling work, and so we are actually seeing a lot more of the runoff heading into the lake this spring. That's fantastic. You saw this slide as well. My slide is 1 day behind Brian's. As usual, he's kind of beat us to the punch on all of these. Nevertheless, it's great to see all this water coming into the lake. I want to mention just something briefly. There does tend to be this 12-year cycle of a couple wet years and then a number of average and dry years. And we are sort of in this wet year piece, and we need to be thinking about and preparing for the average and dry years to come. That I don't think it's terribly likely that we can count on a ton of winters like 2023 and 2024. Now, in terms of living within our water budget, as Speaker Schultz just was alluding to, here's the long-term trends. Long-term trends in Utah: temperatures are rising due to climate change. And precipitation, we've had a number of dry years, but generally precipitation has been about flat over the past 100 years in this space in northern Utah. Certainly some significant drought years in this time, but not a long-term trend in precipitation. If we look at headwater stream flow coming out of the mountains, that is declining slightly, and this is largely, we think, due to some of these rising temperatures. And you can see our groundwater storage also has been declining over this time. Now let's take the flip side. This is the supply of water, the water coming into our bank account that we can use. On the demand side, this is the state water depletions. You can see this is our total depletions from the late 80s to present have been fairly flat. Agriculture is the largest contributor, and then you see some smaller increases in municipal and industrial and mineral extraction. So this is the demand side, what we use water for here in the watershed. Looking forward, we need to keep in mind that temperatures are going to continue to rise, and that hotter air temperatures extract more water out of soils, out of reservoirs and lakes. This is work that Court Strong at the University of Utah did as part of the strike team. And in a high climate change scenario, temperatures rise quite a bit. Precipitation, on the other hand, is expected to rise just a little bit on average, but evaporation rises about as fast, slightly faster than precipitation. So that what that means is, looking forward over the next couple decades to the end of the century, we need to be planning for having slightly less water available coming from the sky that we have to live within that budget. Now, the final piece I'll mention before we jump into some of the policy is that the strike team also calculated different amounts, different scenarios to provide to decision makers on how much water we need to refill the lake to this 4198 level over different time horizons. You can see this red box here is to refill it within 30 years, which is what is in the commissioner's report. We also looked at a scenario of 5 or 10 years, 10 years being particularly salient. We might call it going for gold, because that is when the Olympics will be likely will be in Salt Lake. And the first thing that athletes, journalists, and world leaders are going to see when they come to our great state is the lake. They're going to land at Salt Lake International Airport, and we have the opportunity to tell this incredible success story of restoring the lake and solving this water management challenge here in Utah. Just to give you a quick sense, what this means in terms of rough conservation levels, the refilling within 30 years is really lights turned on. is really around 20% conservation if it's shared evenly across sectors. Being particularly ambitious and refilling by the time the Olympics come is really around 30%. And those are big numbers. I'm sure they give Brian plenty of nightmares at night, but they are doable numbers. In dry years, as a state, we tend to save 20 to 25% in conservation. So this is within the realm of feasibility with work from all of us. I'm going to now turn it over to Matt, our guest cameo.
That's all I have. That's all I have. Sorry. Thank you. Appreciate the great setup and introduction and all of the efforts of the strike team who worked a lot on volunteer basis to try to put a lot of this information together. So definitely an effort of many, and want to recognize that. So the strike team put together some policies, potential policies or options that might help as we strive to maintain and sustain the lake. And there's several, and we won't talk about all of them today. We'll just highlight a few of those. One being the agricultural optimization, which has been discussed prior to this point here. And the second will be water shepherding that Beth will cover. So agriculture is, and will be a major part of the health of the Salt Lake. It's no secret that it is the major, no secret that it's the major user of water in the watershed, and that it has large crosshairs on it, that we're constantly seeking for ways to be more efficient in agriculture so we can use more water, send more water to the lake. So this I would say is one of our grand challenges, is how do we use less water in agriculture and still maintain it, still maintain food security for the state of Utah. And so this was one of the things that we explored. How do we preserve agriculture while reducing depletion? And I want to just mention this three-pronged stool here as we think about optimization. We're constantly thinking about depletion and reducing depletion, and we should. But there's other pieces that do and should come into play. Obviously the cost of doing that, reducing that depletion, the cost of that water, the cost to the farm, the cost to society. And then a third that we don't think about a lot is control. Increasing a farmer's control or ability to measure and manage their water is critical. It's important. If we're going to ask the agriculture industry to use less water, if we can increase their control, their ability to manage it, then it reduces the impact on agriculture, helps them be more resilient. So there's lots of things that can be done to improve optimization of water in agriculture, and we're doing a lot of those. Thanks to farmers across the watershed investing large amounts of money to make changes, and the state investing large amounts to help support those changes. A lot of those have been changes in irrigation systems, and there's lots of different types. And so you can start to look at these, and we did, and the report looked at as many as we could. This is just a short list of a few, to try to compare some of these changes. What impact do they have on potentially reducing depletion of water? What impact do they have on the control or management of water by the farmer? And what do they cost in terms of water saved and the cost of that savings? And it's really interesting as you start to go through this exercise to see that there is a massive difference in the cost of reducing water use when you look at some different options. And so we've tried to take this as a tool, as a guide for the investments that we might make in optimizing water use in agriculture, to focus on those that are going to be most cost effective, that are going to help provide the most amount of resiliency to the farm, and hopefully reduce the depletions the most that we can. So we took just a few of those options and did a very, very coarse estimate of what potential might there be with optimization to reduce depletion in agriculture. So we highlighted just two options, and these two options were selected because they were among the lowest cost per acre foot of water that we might save of depletion. And they both deal with sprinklers. Okay, one is if we converted a majority of the will lines in the watershed to center pivots. We estimated about 3/4 of the area might be suitable. The estimate there is that maybe we could come up with about 67,000 acre-feet of water. Very rough estimate. A second was to improve center pivots with new technologies that might reduce evaporation and wind drift. And if we did that on the majority of the acres that are already in center pivots, then we might save another 27,000 acre-feet of water. So in total, roughly 100,000 acre-feet. Okay, that's a piece. It's a small piece, but it's headed in the right direction, and it's a way that we can efficiently, at a low cost, make investments that are going to help the farm and help provide water. A lot of the Great Salt Lake is surface irrigated. When you look at moving away from surface irrigation, it's really hard to reduce depletion. You can, but it comes at an extremely high cost, magnitudes of order greater than some of these other changes. And there's lots of trade-off to consider when we move from surface irrigation. So just the point is, please read the full report, but with strategic combinations of first, optimizing water in agriculture, we can reduce depletion while minimizing the impact that we may have on the industry. But as you can see, this may not be enough. It's likely not enough. We may need more water for the Salt Lake to sustain it, and so there may need to be some other things that happen to get more water to the lake. Also, as was mentioned earlier by Representative Snider, if we don't ensure that there's tracking and measurement in place, those reductions in agriculture will not mean much and may not make it to the lake. And so other things may need to be in place, like leasing water from agriculture. So we also explored some of these options: split season leases, full season fallow, and then some other options. And so there are some considerations there, lots of considerations to take into account: the cost of these markets, the willingness of people to participate, the ability to track and measure that water that we're going to talk more about. And so there is opportunity here, but there's lots of trade-offs, lots of considerations, lots of things we still need to understand better. And so a few of our recommendations, needs that might be present here, is to have more test markets or pilot markets, better accounting of water use, water consumption on the farm, and then tracking that and moving that to the lake, and then more accurate and more transparent distribution of that water. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we're at with optimization, and now we'll turn the time to Beth.
I'm shorter, so this should be easier. So thank you, Matt and Bill. We've talked about the need to conserve water and methods for conserving water. We've talked about the need to lease that water, and now we're going to talk about how do we get that water to the lake and some of what we know needs to happen and what is being done to ensure that as we save water, that water can be essentially effectively delivered to the Great Salt Lake. Water shepherding is this idea of how do we, when we have a parcel of saved water or a certain quantity of saved water, how do we make sure that it just doesn't get diverted by somebody else right downstream? And it's just a matter of tracking how that water is moving through the system. So in order to ensure this water gets delivered to the lake, and I'm going to try not to move my head because it's a very difficult microphone. There are three different factors that need to be considered. First of all, we have to have accurate quantification of depletions. We need to make sure we have accurate measurement and robust accounting models and timely adjustments. This has all been mentioned by prior speakers. We also have to increase our measurement infrastructure, and I will quickly talk about each of these, But with these three factors, or these three issues addressed, we can make some great progress towards making sure water gets delivered to the lake. When it comes to accurate depletions, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the progress and needs within each of these categories. The legislature has passed a number of bills and to essentially provide an opportunity to file change applications on saved water. This is an important step. But we still have a lot of progress that needs to be made here. First of all, some of the needs are, we need to come up with better standardized depletion accounting methods. Currently, the methods for estimating depletions, it's acknowledged that they're rough and that there's more work to be done there. We also need to validate statewide methods like OpenET, and there are efforts towards making sure that we have access to those data and making sure that those data are accurate enough to be used. But that does not address our need for potential for essentially forecasting what a depletion savings may be. It provides real-time information about what depletion savings have occurred. We need to centralize data and methods, and I'll come back to this, where we are able to track what people are using and have access to those data. And then we need to fund these kind of farm-scale measurements to ensure that we have a better estimate of depletion savings. When it comes to accurate measurement and accounting models and timely adjustments, we clearly need to not know only what's going on out there, but we need to have accounting models, of which the State Engineer's Office has done a good job of developing in most basins, where we can keep track of where water's going and who's using what fractions. In terms of progress, we are currently in the process of doing a measurement and infrastructure gap analysis at Utah State. We're nearly done with this, the idea being, where do we need measurements to make sure that we understand what's happening through these systems? That can be diversions, but that can also be in-stream measurements. There's also been a hydroinformatics and technology gap analysis done by Jeff Horsborough at Utah State, and this is in collaboration with Water Rights, where we are trying to figure out what are the needs in terms of just the cyber infrastructure, or the data management piece, to make sure that any data that we collect, we can organize well and give back to the public. So there's just a real transparency issue there where we're trying to address that. There's also been a one-time RFA that was for $3 million to focus on addressing some of these data management needs. If we have data and we can access that data and give it to others very easily, you can see that there's a problem. So accessing data is a key part of this. There's also an ongoing, or there will be an investigation of a statewide water database and data center that is going to occur over the next year to try to figure out how do we pull together all of the data that we have related to water. So if any of you have done any sort of attempts to get data from different agencies, sometimes that can be very challenging. So how do we make it easier to pull the information we need together to make better decisions? What still needs to happen is the development and refinement of distribution accounting models. This is something that Division of Water Rights is taking seriously and they're working on. There's some basins where there aren't models, so they are looking to continue that development. There's also the incorporation of real-time data into these accounting models. As we are collecting these data, being able to respond to needs or changes in real time and having controls, as Matt just mentioned, can be a critical part of better management of these systems. Number 3, the enhanced measurement infrastructure. Clearly, we need to have more gauges and better estimates of what's happening, where water's going throughout the basin. We have spent in the measurement infrastructure gap analysis that we've been working on with Water Rights, there's been a big investment on figuring out what's sitting out there in terms of measurement infrastructure, where we have needs and where maybe the actual flow measurements are potentially lacking, and then where are we missing data in particular areas that would enhance distribution, but also provide some insight into what's happening in the system generally. There's been, the last legislative session, there was $1 million investment of one-time funds and $1 million of ongoing funds towards gauging. This is a very important investment to make it so we can start putting out those gauging stations so we know what is happening in different locations. There's also some potential for, as part of this gap analysis, we've been looking into all of the minor inflows that go into the Great Salt Lake directly to try to map those areas in the wetland complexes. Where is water actually making it to the lake, and how much is making it to the lake? So there's more work to be done along those lines. What do we need to do? Well, we need to continue investment in measurement. Good measurements are expensive, unfortunately. It's a lot of work to provide really good flow information. So we need to continue investing in that, and it requires constant maintenance. We also need to develop statewide data management tools. How do we actually, once we have all these data organized and in these databases, how do we make all of this data accessible? What tools do we need to make it so all of us in our various roles can access this information? And then, of course, we need to just actually use this information in the context of management to provide more information to everybody and make it so we can pull together to create collaborative decision making. So this is where the statewide efforts could be very useful. Lessons learned from the Great Salt Lake Strike Team. Well, there were a number of them, and I actually am going to go a little bit backwards here. First of all, the investments in observational and modeling infrastructure are essential. That was one of the first things that we spent a lot of time debating and arguing. What does that look like? Clearly, you've heard this repeatedly from a lot of people, and there's not been that many people. Pretty much everybody that's spoken has said that this is a need, and it could be at the farm scale, but it's also at the watershed scale and at the canal or distribution scale. Conserved water needs to be able to make it to the lake. If we conserve water and then somebody else downstream uses this, then it doesn't benefit the lake, so we need to just make sure we get it to the lake. As has been mentioned, and as Matt pointed out, there are trade-offs to all the decisions that we make. How we use water, how we conserve water, and how do we balance the needs of people, the needs of the environment, and the needs of the lake in general. And finally, there's no single solution for the lake. Matt provided a great understanding of ag conservation is a really important part of the solution, but it's not going to be the solution. It requires all of us to pull together and to provide as many options as we can for conservation. And with that, we'll take questions. No questions. Oh, Wayne's coming.
Yeah, for Matt in particular, you gave a rough estimate of about 90,000 acre feet that might be saved from optimization. Was that in Utah, or is that the whole watershed? And if it's the whole watershed, how do we extend our application and our funding to the farmers in Idaho and Wyoming to save water for us?
Very great question. So what I showed today is just the Salt Lake watershed inside of Utah, okay? And only for a couple options, just looking at improving sprinkler systems. There's other things that are and can be done to reduce and optimize water use in agriculture. We have not delved into trying to figure out what could be done in Idaho and Wyoming yet, but very important.
So I've got a question for Bill, I think. I've been really curious about how the predicted timing and intensity of precip might influence the amount of water, the proportion of water that actually makes it to the lake. Would more intense storms kind of on shoulder seasons actually result in more runoff that would actually proportionately make more water to the lake?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's somewhat complicated. So, a lot of we have reservoirs upstream of the lake, right? And a lot of that water will end up there first, and kind of upstream of that, how much of that infiltrates versus headed into the streams. I generally, more big pulse events should send more water into the streams, But then it depends on what the reservoirs and the water managers decide to do. And I think if they get more water than they expected, they might, be able to send more down to the lake. But I would say it's pretty complicated. I don't know if Beth wants to add.
I think that is a complicated question because it depends on where that stormwater goes. Sometimes it goes directly to streams in Cache Valley. A lot of our stormwater ends up in canals. And so how does that work? I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
But we'll take all the spring snow that we can get. I'm 100%.
I just had a question for the guest speaker, guys. I just missed your name, sorry.
Okay.
I was trying to understand a little better, and I'm still learning about all these issues. You said that with water optimization that, that the state has to lease the water in order for it to actually be saved and to make it to the Great Salt Lake. And I just didn't understand why, if they implement, optimized water systems where, less water is being used, why does the water then also have to be leased to get to the Great Salt Lake?
Great question, and a very complicated, controversial topic that's hard to, so a lot of farms are already optimizing water on their own. Some are doing that with support and assistance of the state. There's a discussion about when the state helps support that, what does that mean for the reduced depletion? Is it an obligation to then donate that water elsewhere, right? So farmers still have the right to that water, and so that's where the discussion of leasing comes in, is that they have a right to it. If they use less than what they have a right to use, then the expectation generally is that they'll be compensated for that reduction. Looks like we're at time.
We're at time. I don't know. Do we take one more quick question or no? I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, we're going to go ahead.
Okay. My question is for you, Beth. With the $1 million one-time funding and $1 million ongoing for equipment, like how far does that get us? Like, does that cover the watershed, portion of the watershed? Thank you.
Great question. Blake, Teresa. I think that it's a start. I think that it will make progress. Will it cover everything? No. Will it make it so we have a better idea of the major contributors to the lake and where water's going? Generally speaking, it's definitely going to help a lot. But it's not. I think that there needs to be potentially more investments because there's return flows and a lot of other water that gets moved around that we aren't tracking that in a way that maybe all the different governmental agencies would like. So there's the water rights part, there's also water resources, et cetera. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I actually thought I should have kept it in my pocket. I didn't. Always gotta trust your gut. It's that one, yeah. Okay, great.
Sorry about that.
Are you okay to talk really loud, and then if you can click using the clicker on here or the arrow. The arrow. If that's it. Yes. Talk really loud.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, there's so many faces out here. It's so great to see you all. Can you hear me okay? Bend down, step back. Just hang with us. I know you guys are probably ready for a break, but we have just one more presentation and we'll let you all go. Lynn, I don't know about you, but it just makes my heart warm to feel, or to see all these people here and to see how the Issues Forum has grown over the last couple of years. I was thinking the other day, one of the things that stuck out to me, recent memories, was during COVID, and I was talking to Lynn on the phone, and it wasn't like early COVID, it was kind of like later in COVID, and we were talking about whether we should go ahead and have the Issues Forum or not, and just really, you know, kind of weighing the pros and cons of moving forward with the Issues Forum, and Lynn was deciding to not have the forum, and I just remember that was one of the most impactful things, and just kind of like reality, I don't know, just it kind of sunk in, and we were all just kind of like isolated and alone, and I was just like, but I really want to meet with all these people and see all these people, and so I'm glad that we were able to recover from COVID and all join back here stronger together. So thanks, Lynn, for having us. My name is Laura Vernon. I'm the Great Salt Lake Basin Planner with the Division of Water Resources, and I'm here with Jake Sarago, also with Water Resources, and I'm going to talk to you about the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan that we're working on that Brian alluded to. Bear with us, this is a new presentation format Jake is encouraging me to use, and I'm trying to get on board with it. All right, so I can't guarantee that this is going to go over really well, but all right. So what are the water challenges in the Great Salt Lake Basin? As you all know, and if you heard, and you're going to continue to hear, how water resources have been stressed in recent years. The lake has hit historic lows. Communities have had to cut back on their water use. The speaker mentioned springs were running dry. So we all know that the resources in the basin were stressed. We also don't know what a shared vision or what a healthy Great Salt Lake looks like. We kind of know what that looks like now with the matrix and things going, a lot of the research that's been done, but what does a healthy Harriman City look like, or what does a healthy Cache Valley look like? We don't know from a basin perspective what a healthy Great Salt Lake Basin looks like. As we've heard today, there's not really a consensus on the problem. A lot of us in this room know the importance of keeping water in the lake, but there's also issues with, like Representative Snider was mentioning, with water reuse and the concept of not a drop of water getting to, or water that gets to the lake is wasted water. So there's more people on board today with the definition of the problem of a drying Great Salt Lake, but not everybody's on board. And as Beth just said, there's no consensus on one solution. There's not one solution that will bring water to the lake. If there were, we would have done it by now. There's no consensus on the data or methods that we've been using, and I think in this planning process, we're going to really explore that. While Weber Basin may have one way to collect data and look at flows, Bear River won't do the same. And so how do we get all of these river basins and the lake together in one, comparing apples to apples instead of apples to oranges from all the different basins? And then we want to have to be able to make informed decisions. So when the lake is hitting historic lows and we're seeing brine flies disappear and brine shrimp disappear, how can we use a planning tool, to make the best decisions possible, some informed decisions rather than just hasty decisions that were made in short order. The Great Salt Lake Basin is complex. Oh, see, look. So just a glimpse at the complexity. It's complex on a social level and on a technical level. From a spatial perspective, 36,000 square miles, covers 4 states, 18 counties. We've got plenty of reservoirs, 150,000 water rights. We've got a lot of farmland, and that's being heavily pressured with development and urban acres. And we've got some critical wetlands that are paramount to migratory birds. And then we've got the people part, right? We've got 2.6 million people and all of their values, beliefs, and attitudes. So having people all understanding the importance of water in the basin, what the cause is, what the solution is, it's hard to get everyone on the same page. So because of these complexities, because of the social and technological complexities of doing a creating a planning tool at the basin level. It hasn't been done before. So Jake and I are doing it now with a lot of help from a lot of you. And when we complete the plan, oh, Jake, the puzzle's gone. So just picture, if you will, a pile of puzzle pieces right here. This is the way that I think of this planning project, is a pile of puzzle pieces. And you sit down and you're going to do a puzzle, but it's nearly impossible to do a puzzle when you don't have like what the final image should look like. And I feel like that's what I'm really working with here with the basin plan. We know we have a lot of pieces, but we don't know what the final picture is going to look like. And so really exploring that, diving into the individual basins and understanding the complexities in the lake, in the basins, that's something that we need to work on over the next couple of years. And then finally, when we're getting close to, after we put the border pieces together and we've started filling in all the similar colors, and then we find out we're missing pieces, I think that's kind of another illustration of this project is where I see, again, like Weber Basin could have the data and the tools for their basin, but they don't have the same data and tools that the Jordan River Provo area has. And so we're missing puzzle pieces and we have this incomplete picture. And so this management plan for the basin seeks to complete that puzzle. And when we implement this plan, we'll have a resilient water supply for Great Salt Lake and for all of the water uses in the basin. And just to be clear, this management plan, planning tool, is not just simply to ensure the health of Great Salt Lake. We want that's a core component, but it's also to ensure that other water uses in the basin have the adequate water that they need as well. All right, so we couldn't do this enormous project without a few key components. One is money and one is people. And so we were fortunate enough to get legislative funding in the tune of $5 million in 2022 through HB 429 that's creating the integrated water assessment. And right around the same time, Jake worked with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to apply for a basin study grant, and we were awarded that too. So we're working in partnership with the Bureau of Reclamation, Dwight Slaw's in the back there, on one kind of mega model, one mega project. We're combining forces and to bring a tool to the Great Salt Lake Basin that hasn't been done before. And well, now we have the money. We need to make sure we have enough people on board to help us execute this project. So the Great Salt Lake Commissioner is key. We want them to use this as a decision-making tool moving forward. This tool will be able to inform their decision-making 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, as they're trying to understand the best way to get water to Great Salt Lake. We have formed an advisory group for the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan that's comprised of state and federal partners. We meet monthly and we're talking about the issues that their groups are facing and how they may weigh in and help us complete this plan. We have compiled a steering committee that is with special interest groups, other stakeholders in the basin, industry, water districts, those who are using water and know how water is moving within their basins. They're going to be critical in the project. We have a long list, 200 or so, a list of water users. We can't do this project. We can't suggest changes in water use without getting other people, these water users, on board. We have public participants, the general public. We want to make sure everyone's aware of these recommendations that would come from the plan. And this is kind of the architecture, the structure of how we're envisioning our groups talking together. We have the steering committee and the advisory group overseen by the Division of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation. And then we have, thanks to Representative Hawks, who was here earlier, previous Representative Hawks, created watershed councils. So each of the basins has watershed councils. Those will kind of serve as the touch points for a lot of the communications that we're doing throughout the basin when we're working on this plan. And then within each of those advisory councils, we have technical groups that'll be working on the modeling tools and different features, different desired components that we need for each of the basins. And then we'll have a groundwater, wetlands, agriculture, and municipal industrial technical teams. And Jake's going to talk a bit more about those. So before I get started talking too much about a lot of the planning that's going on in Great Salt Lake, I think a lot of you have heard about all sorts of different plans, and I know many of us have fielded questions about how is your plan different than the comprehensive management plan versus the strategic plan. And so the Department of Natural Resources is trying to tackle this issue and lay out a explanation of how all of these projects are playing out and playing together. And so this is just a first look at all the different plans that are going on. We have the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan, the Basin Integrated Plan, the Comprehensive Management Plan, the Great Salt Lake Water Rights Distribution Management Plan, and then the Trust 5-year watershed enhancement. And so you can see which agency is responsible, what the goals are, what the key objectives are, and where they are in the process. And so over the next couple of days, I'm sure you'll hear plenty about a lot of these projects. So just kind of take this back into your mind and think about, you know, which of the goals, which of the projects are achieving which key objectives for the lake. Because they are all different, and I know it's confusing, but we want to be able to articulate this to the communities. So back to the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. And just last month, we wrapped up the final work plan. We did have to, as crazy as it sounds, we had to complete a plan for the plan because it was such a big, monstrous task. We did a plan for a plan. And the work plan included two main components. It included the stakeholder engagement. I talked a little bit about forming the advisory groups and the steering committees. We also did public outreach. We did a situational assessment, interviewing people about what they thought their concerns were for water in the watershed. And then we also did the technical, we worked on the technical aspects, understanding the building blocks, how much, and starting to ask the questions that were key in our gap analysis about how much water does Great Salt Lake need, what is our current water supply, what is our projected water supply, water demands, future water demands. And so we had a list of questions in our gap, in our gap analysis. It was about a list of 700 questions long, but just really narrowing down what key questions need to be asked in order to solve water management challenges in the basin. And so with that, we came up with this kind of task list for the next couple of years. So a lot of the work, the bulk of the work is going to be in the modeling and planning, creating this model that Jake's going to talk about in a minute, and kind of doing the scenario planning, trade-off analysis, things like that. But then we also have a list of 8 projects that were recommended during the gap analysis to fill the gaps that we, some key information that we need to better understand Great Salt Lake and the watershed. And so you can kind of see what the projects are that we're working on over the next couple of years, and we think that these projects, in addition to the modeling and planning, will help inform decisions for Great Salt Lake Commissioner, for the Division of Water Rights. It will help all of us make decisions about the basin moving into the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Jake, and he can talk about the modeling piece.
Thank you, Laura. That was a great job. I'm Jake. I'm going to talk about these steps. These are the major planning steps to take in the planning process to get to where we want to go, which is to describe the full final puzzle, so that then we can all sit around the table and chit-chat and puzzle together. Also, just a thanks to everyone who's been involved in this process and everyone who will be involved in this process. It's I'm going to talk about some technical aspects, but those are all really doable. It's this social aspect that is tremendous here, and which is most necessary in order to make this, to do the planning and to make it implementable, and then to implement it afterward. So first, I'll go through this fairly quickly, but first is to develop performance measures, and these are the way that we assess how the whole watershed behaves, whether some decision or suite of decisions that we do is positive or negative. And this helps build on the fantastic work of the strike team, which they use the available tools and data to very quickly do high quality analysis to provide what you saw earlier. But they're lacking, we're all lacking the available tools so that we can be able to assess this. And these are just examples of how, some performance measures you might choose. There's almost an infinite number. One that's a really good example is whether the lake is saved or not. That's, save the lake is a really good slogan. It's really valuable for communicating, but in terms of measuring, in terms of planning and quantifying, it sort of means nothing. It's a binary choice of saved or dead, and how are we supposed to assess really whether the lake is saved? You just have to quantify various aspects about that. In terms of salinity, and because it's a natural system that's variable, it's going to change. So you can't look at some constant elevation. It's tricky. So working on that is one thing, and each of these blocks involves all of the planning partners that Laura showed. So that's multiple state agencies, private contractors, as well as hundreds of water users. So modeling existing condition, this is my favorite part because I like models. This diagram shows how we can utilize numerical models to represent the natural system and the human system, because models are really valuable because we can make all the changes that we want without it being expensive. We have no regrets if we test something in a model and see what the results will be. So the idea here is to basically represent using available data that goes into determining what agricultural, municipal, industrial, environmental demands are, as well as using climate data to generate how the watershed responds in terms of runoff and groundwater, and then how the water, once it enters into human systems such as reservoirs and canals, eventually makes it to the lake. So I'm just going to zoom into, and so the way that this is done is by formulating different teams for each of these components, and many of you are on these teams. These teams will grow, so if you want to be on these teams, come talk to me. And I'll zoom into each one of these parts. So in terms of the rainfall runoff model, in terms of representing snow accumulation, snow melt, runoff, this is done with a basin-wide model called the VIC model. And the main output of this is to represent hydrograph. And so this hydrograph is obviously really valuable. That's what all water managers, that's what fish love to see. The hydrograph is so important. So this model produces hydrographs, both historic and possibly future hydrographs. And those hydrographs are then fed into a river basin model. This is a map that our office produces that represents water-related land use. And so we have models of each of these river basins that have been produced by different groups. And these models, they primarily do here is, these models represent what's shown in that dotted box. So you input hydrographs and groundwater, you input what the water user demands are, and then these models represent how that water moves throughout the system. So is it pulled out? Is it returned? Is it stored? Does it flow out to Great Salt Lake? And so as it happens, this would be very hard to do 10 or 15 years ago, but since then, groups have been actively working on building these models. So in the Bear, we have a model that was developed by Idaho Department of Water Resources, Wyoming State Engineer's Office, Pacific Corps, and the Utah Department of Water Resources. It represents the main stem of the Bear and Bear Lake. There's a Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, Utah State University, the Utah Division of Water Resources built a model of the Weber and Ogden rivers. In the Jordan, there's a model that represents all of the municipal agricultural uses, return flows into Farmington Bay. And Utah Lake Central Utah Water Conservancy District has developed a model of the Provo River Utah Lake System. So you can see we have all of these different models. Now we just need to put them together. And by putting them together, then we can get outflow from the river basins into the Great Salt Lake. There we have an existing Great Salt Lake model, which represents inflow and water consumption in the wetlands. Water flows then through the wetlands into the lake. We have a lake salinity, salt, and water balance model. So putting those all together, we can formulate a picture of existing conditions, and then we can simulate future conditions. And so some of those look like what Dr. Anderegg was discussing, but futures that are drier, that are wetter, that are hotter, earlier melt, more rain than snow, and as well as looking at what the impacts to these might be on existing water uses, on residential, agriculture, and environmental. And then once we have that in place, we can begin to test all kinds of options. So we can test the most controversial options. We can test the most improbable options, right? But we'll go through a process with water interests and water users and our steering committee to refine this list to identify those which we want to test. Once we test them with the model, we can start to understand what the impacts are and refine that list over time. So there's a lot of possibilities here for the things that we can test. And then we want to assess what the trade-offs were. The strike team mentioned how important trade-offs were. So this graph shows how we may have 3 different alternatives. Each one of those alternatives could be a suite of different management options, changes to infrastructure, changes to water policy, and each one of those affects the performance measures in different ways. And so alternative A has the effect of maximizing food production, but the result is that the urban population has to be low, shorebird habitat is impacted, and lake dust risk from dust is fairly high. This is all hypothetical. I invented this because it doesn't exist yet. That's what we want to do. It's just demonstrating the purpose. But how you could change something, so depending on different policies and water use options, you maximize the urban population, but in a sense you trade food production. So you got to get your food from Costa Rica or California or something like that. And then the whole point is to utilize the information from those trade-offs, iterate with selecting management alternatives to develop an actionable plan. And, like Director Steed, Commissioner Steed mentioned, it's really about taking how to make the plan implementable is the key, because any plan looks good on paper, but we need this to be implementable. So in our perspective, everyone's trying to assemble the puzzle, and a puzzle can be hard to do. It's better with friends and family, but it's almost impossible to do, especially when you have like a 10 million piece puzzle, which is sort of what we have. How do you do the puzzle together with a group if you don't have the box top to see what the puzzle looks like? So all that this plan is doing, all that it's doing, is coming up with what that puzzle box is, so that then we can begin to implement it by putting the pieces together. So that's the overall planning process, and it's going on right now. Tune in, check out our website. You can find the work plan that Laura mentioned. The full work plan is on the website. You can also subscribe to a newsletter to get information and updates on what all is happening, as well as learn how you can participate and stay informed. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Thank you, Laura. Thank you to all of the presenters this morning. We now have a break until 10:30. So all of the break stuff is in the next ballroom, the Douglas Ballroom. So get some fresh air, have something to eat.